This is from, I think it's from 1970. Larry Norman.
Sipping whiskey from a paper cup. You drown your sorrows till you can't stand up. And take a look at what you've done to yourself. Why don't you put the bottle back on the shelf? Yellow-fingered from your cigarettes. Your hands are shaking while your body sweats. Why don't you look into Jesus? He got the answer.
Listen to this. No, listen to this. It's good, man. The lyrics are good.
Gonorrhea on Valentine's Day, and you're still looking for the perfect play. You think rock and roll will set you free, honey? You'll be dead before you're 33. Shooting junk till you're half insane. A broken needle in your purple vein. Why don't you look into Jesus? He got the answer. Work all night, sleep all day. You take your money, throw it all away. You say you're gonna be a superstar, but you never hung around enough to find out who you really are.
That was from Joe Rogan's podcast a couple of months ago in early October of 2023. Joe Rogan, of all people, singing what might be the best and most well-known song from the Jesus movement by Larry Norman. That very song kept Larry from getting gigs in most churches during the early 70s simply because he mentioned sex and VD. Not that Larry needed churches, he was playing to large crowds all over the world. He even sold out the Royal Albert Hall twice in the same day. Bob Dylan, Cliff Richard, Bono, Paul McCartney, Van Morrison, and scores of others were among his fans. In fact, Dylan became a Christian at a Bible study Larry was teaching. But while the music of the Jesus movement deserves a video of its own, really, I want to tell you in simple terms what the movement itself meant to me as a teenager during those years. I grew up in an Assembly of God church during the 1960s where my parents were the youth leaders. I was a child of the Jesus movement, really, or at least the tail end of it. Christian writer and musician John Fisher says it lasted from about 1968 to 1972, but in my mind that was just the opening stages of something that really took off in 1972 and carried on until about the end of 1978, at least here in the Midwest. Of course, everything starts on the coast and slowly filters its way to the middle of the country, and when it ends on the coast, it will still be going on here for a few more years. I mean, heck, we still had hippies in southern Illinois into the 1980s, especially in the small towns. My own involvement in the Jesus movement started during the summer of 1975, between my sophomore and junior years of high school. My birthday is in March, so I already had my driver's license. Plus, we had moved to a horrible little German town of 4,000 people a few years earlier, and now have moved to a big city of 50,000 over the summer. And that move changed my life. This was closer to where I was originally from, and it was also closer to our church. And as fate would have it, they had just started a Saturday night youth group that summer, which I began attending for lack of anything better to do. And because some of my friends went, and the only kids I knew really in town were the kids from my church. A young, long-haired boy from our church, Rich, who it seemed nobody really knew, brought his guitar and led us in some songs, such as I had never heard before. Churches were famous for what C.S. Lewis once referred to as fifth-rate poems set to sixth-rate music. But here were some songs I really liked. They had a drawing power to them that captivated me. And turns out this kid was involved in the Jesus movement through his college buddies. And he was a bona fide Jesus freak, the first I'd ever seen.
Songs in the air, songs everywhere. I like the view that brought me close to you. Sun flying by, if you blink an eye, you may miss the tune, but it'll come back soon. Oh. Suddenly I hear this song
wasn't long before some of his Jesus freak friends started coming too, all of them well into their 20s and probably too old for a youth group, but we were a better group for having them around. So we started calling the group young people instead of a youth group. I should probably interject here that Jesus freak is not a derogatory term. We used to call people freaks of one kind or another all the time back then. Like if you loved geography, you were a geography freak. If you really dug sports, you were a sports freak. If you were really into Christianity, the Bible or church and so on, you were a Jesus freak. Rich didn't like the term too much, though. When people called him a Jesus freak, he would tell them, God doesn't make freaks out of people, he makes people out of freaks. Well, he wasn't wrong.
I want the people to know that he saved my soul, but I still like to listen to the radio. They say rock and roll is wrong, we'll give you one more chance. I say I feel so good, I gotta get up and dance. Woo! I know what's right, I know what's wrong, I don't confuse it. And all I wanna know is why should the devil have all the good music? I feel good every day because Jesus is the rock and he rolled my blues away. They say to cut my hair, they're driving me insane. I grew it out long to make room for my brain. But sometimes people don't understand what's a Christian doing in a rock and roll band. There's nothing wrong with the flatted third or the basic blues licks. All I wanna know is why should the devil have all the good music? I feel good, I've been filled, I feel okay, because Jesus is the rock and he rolled my blues away. Yes, he did. I ain't knocking the hymns. Just give me a song that has a beat. I ain't knocking the hymns. Just give me a song that moves my feet. I don't like none of those funeral marches. I ain't dead yet. Jesus told the truth, and Jesus showed the way. There's one more thing I'd like to say. They nailed him to the cross and they laid him in the ground, but they should have known you can't keep a good man down.
Truth be told, I like these Jesus freaks much more than the church kids, and became good friends with several of them. And soon I started hanging out with them and attending home meetings around town they had started. One was at the small house owned by two young ladies who were roommates and didn't look the Jesus freak hippie types at all. They were more the button-down business office types, but yet here they were hosting a weekly home meeting for these Jesus people, half of whom didn't even wear shoes. But we all had a great time just hanging out and talking about what was going on in our lives and how God had done something extraordinary for one of them, which seemed to be almost always the case. Another home group I attended was run by two guys, both of whom were married and had kids, but sharing a house. Communal living was very common among Jesus freaks all over the world. Sometimes it was just a few people, and other times it was more like a full-fledged commune, such as Jesus People USA in Chicago, which I had visited once. I spent a good deal of my youth in Christian coffee houses and home meetings with the post-hippie generation, from Carbondale to St. Louis to Chicago and eventually Toledo, Ohio. And one thing that was incredibly apparent was just how much everybody loved one another. And that was the thing that had been missing from my life. That little German town I had just moved from was violent and steeped in drugs and alcohol abuse. Several of the kids I went to school with ended up in prison. My friend Kerry got shot in the arm by a cop in Missouri while climbing out of a window of a house he was burglarizing. 3 older boys in a row, 2 of them brothers, committed suicide after getting drunk. One ran his car into a tree, and the other 2 purposely laid out on a busy highway and let cars run over them. Word was that there was a lot of inbreeding in that town, and I believe it. These people were insane and under an obvious evil influence of some kind. Even as a boy, I recognized there was something devilish happening. I watched fifth graders stand in an alley and fight until their eyes were completely swollen shut on a regular basis. The place was like something out of a Stephen King novel. I despised it. I just wanted to be a good person. And there was no love to be found in that town. Everybody hated each other. Small Midwestern German towns are often like that. Moving away was the best thing for my family, and I was very grateful for it when it happened. I wasn't thinking much about God back then, but later on I looked back and realized just how much the hand of providence was at work in my life and always had been. Even in the worst situations, you learn about yourself, and God will test your mettle. That's not so he can see what you're made of. He already knows. So you can see what you're made of and what you need to work on. And that's a process that will repeat itself over and over until the day you pass from this life. Now, what did I learn from the Jesus movement? In a word, charity. We shared nearly everything. If someone needed money, he would get it. If somebody needed a place to stay, someone else was eager to offer them a room. We even drove each other's cars. And while you probably associate Jesus freak post-hippies with inner cities, you'd be surprised how much time we spent in the country. We went on many excursions a couple of hours south to the Illinois Ozarks at sites like Giant City or Garden of the Gods. Sometimes we went to Easter services at the Bald Knob Cross of Peace in Alto Pass, from which you can see 3 states. Nearby Trigg Tower has been rebuilt to half its original height, but it used to be 100 feet tall in the early 70s, and I believe you could still see Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas during its heyday. And often we used to travel to the Ozarks in Missouri, too, and swim at Elephant Rock, cliff dive at Johnson Shut-ins, or take float trips down Current River. And, of course, these guys talked about Jesus to people everywhere they went. I didn't much because I was just a shy teenager. They were all quite a bit older than me. But they were very cool about it and were always bringing new people to meetings. A few years later, I stopped going to church altogether. I tried going back a few times, but every church I tried seemed to have more hypocrites than true believers. The very things they preached against were the things they were worst at. St. Paul said, "But now I am writing to you that you must not associate with anyone who claims to be a brother or sister, but is sexually immoral, or greedy, an idolater, or slanderer, a drunkard, or a swindler. Do not even eat with such people." Of course, that's just sensible advice for anyone, whether you're a Christian or not. I'm not knocking people who found a good church. I just got tired of looking. I think I can safely say that 1975 to 1978 were easily the best years of my life, and at the forefront of that time was the best music I ever heard. Unlike the junk that was on secular radio back then, the majority of which was about sex, followed by drugs and drinking. Even as a teenager, I used to wonder how it was they couldn't think to write of anything more worthwhile. But what we used to call Jesus music was head and shoulders above it. I was going to make this video largely about the music from the Jesus movement, but I'd probably wind up with a copyright strike, so if I ever do make a video like that, I'll probably upload it to Rumble instead. But let me say now that Keith Green predicted in early 1978 that the spirit would go out of the music, and part of the reason was that big secular record companies started to get involved, and boy was he right. That, in my estimation, was the last great year of what we used to call Jesus music, and the Jesus movement itself disappeared from our lives as well. And those ragamuffin, unchurched Christians we call Jesus freaks all started joining churches and going mainstream. However, I've always tried to keep that spirit of giving with me. I've managed to put aside about $8 or $9 grand this year for an operation I feel like I need, although it isn't absolutely essential, but which neither Medicare nor the VA will pay for. You know, it wouldn't surprise me a bit if the phone rang between now and then and somebody needing that money for something more important was on the line. And if that happens, I'm happy to give it. You've heard it said that it all belongs to God anyway, and it truly does. I let divine providence rule my life. If you aren't a happy giver, you aren't within 1,000 miles of Christ. Like C.S. Lewis said, if you don't have to tighten your belt a little at the end of the year, you probably haven't given enough. The average age of death for someone 6'4" is actually 64. I'll be 65 in March. I could live to be 100, but realistically, I probably don't have that many years left. I like to spend them being as charitable as possible. And I'd like to encourage you to be as charitable as you can during this Christmas season. Think about giving a gift to someone that you know isn't likely to give you one, because that would just be a swap rather than a gift. And if you have no money, at least be charitable with your time. When making those calls to friends and family for Christmas, why not include one to somebody who wouldn't expect it and maybe doesn't even deserve it? If you can't love your enemies during Christmas, when can you? Have a nice holiday, everyone.